Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on streaming in-person classes, the HyFlex option. Our presenter today is David Baskind, a psychology professor of 30 years at Delta College in Michigan. And my name is Christine, and I am your moderator today from Hawks Learning. So just to let you know that we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. So please enter any questions into the Q&A as we go. And with that, I will hand it over to my presenter here. Just one moment. We're going to just one moment to pull up David's presentation here. And thank you, David, again for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure being here. And good morning, everyone who is joining us. I'm here in sunny Michigan, and ironically, on a presentation dealing with technology. We had a little technology glitch that we are trying to work out here. Hopefully you will bear with us, and hopefully things will go pretty smooth. I am joined by my dog, who is sleeping quietly. That may change at any given moment, so if I have to address things, I will. But she's usually pretty chill.
Okay, so I think I've got David's presentation here.
Terrific.
So everybody good to go? So with no further ado, David Baskind, and I'll go ahead and let him take it over.
Terrific. Yeah, thanks again to you for your assistance with this, and good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining in this morning. And if you want to get us to the first slide, I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of how I came about this. So you probably remember well, it was about 4 years ago that the pandemic began, and we shifted from in-person classes to remote classes. And I had to do that not only for that particular semester, but for the 2 classes I was teaching in May and June. And at some point during that summer, we didn't know what exactly was going to happen in the world at that point yet. But it looked like we were going to be, dealing with mainly remote classes for a while, at least for some period of time. And one of my supervisors asked if I would be interested in teaching one of my classes in person. And I was willing to do that. I was actually comfortable enough doing that. They provided plastic barriers. Everyone was masked. We had fewer students than usual allowed in the classroom. But I ran into a little bit of a snag in that I had 20 students enrolled in the class, and the classroom would only allow 16 students in it. So I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do about that. And I came up with an idea of having a rotating system in which I would have 16 students in the room, and then I would have the additional 4 students join us remotely. So what that meant was that I needed to start live streaming my classes. This was a decision that I had made. I wasn't too familiar with this process. I had never done it before. But I thought, you know what, I want to give this a try. And so what I did using my LMS system, we have Desire to Learn, D2L, Brightspace. They have a feature there called the virtual classroom that would allow me to live stream my classes and record those classes. So I thought this would be a really good alternative, knowing that students were going to have to miss class from time to time just because of the numbers. 20 students, 16 seats, and also given the possibility of them having health issues and all the usual things that we run into: transportation issues, job issues, childcare issues, oversleeping issues, needing to be there to be with a family member. So I thought this was going to be a good way that I could ensure that everyone could be in the class, whether they were there in person or from a distance, and decided to give this a whirl. So that's kind of the setup to how I began doing this. And if you want to move on to the next slide, the how-to. And I apologize for things getting a little small there, but it should be okay, hopefully, for you. So what I decided to do was to use my laptop. Our college provides laptops for everyone. I'm sure most of you have a laptop as well. And it does have a camera at the top of it. And I figured that would probably be the easiest way to make that work. I also thought that in a pinch, I could use my phone. And ironically, as we're getting closer to the presentation, I've been using my phone quite a bit in the past couple of weeks because I've found just kind of some dead zones in my classrooms. I'm not sure why that's happening. I need to talk to some of our tech people at the college. But the phone has worked just as well as the laptop. These days, by the way, at our college, we do have a number of smart classrooms where they do have cameras and microphones already built in there, and the cameras will follow you. I'm not totally ready to move into that system yet, but I do have some colleagues who are using that. So as I mentioned earlier, I set it up in the virtual classroom in Brightspace. And what this allowed me to do was even before the semester began, I was able to put in all of the dates. It allowed me to choose the start time, the finish time, maximum number of students, and it allowed an option for recording it. And I definitely wanted to do this because, as I mentioned before, in our regular classes, we have students who miss, and it happens to all of us, on a regular basis. And in the past, I would always have to spend some time with the students saying, oh, yeah, we talked about this and this and this. Here are some of my notes. You may want to borrow a classmate's notes to get more thorough information. And I love now that I can just tell the students, hey, take a look at the recording. You don't have to miss a word of what I said in class that day. You don't have to miss any of the things that were available up on the screen. And again, I was able to set all of this up before the semester began. The recordings usually pull up a couple hours after the class ends. So it just takes a while because it's a pretty big file. Most of our classes go for 2 to 3 hours. Some of the classes that I teach in May and June go for 4 hours straight. So you can understand why it takes a little time before it uploads to the system. I always try to get to class early, and I try to log in 5, 10 minutes before class starts just to be sure technology is working, because as we know, technology does not always cooperate. And as I was mentioning to you just a little bit ago, I've had it happen a few times lately where it would start off working just fine with my laptop, and then the system would disconnect. And I would get it back up and it would disconnect. And then I realized, you know what, I'll just do it with my phone. And I, knock on wood, haven't had any issues with the phone live streaming the classes. So the way that I typically do it is at the beginning of class, I will have the camera pointed right at me. I will talk to the camera and also to the class, looking around as I normally would. And then once class gets going, I tend to point the camera up at the screen where it's got the material. And then what I tend to do is go into screen a little bit. I tend to face the students who are in the room. And then I do sometimes look directly at the camera also. So I try to make good eye contact, not only with the students who are present in front of me, but also the students who might be joining us electronically. I feel they deserve that attention too. So that's the way I prefer it. Point the camera up at the screen and appear into frame from time to time. When I do it, I like to make myself appear bigger on the screen in front of me, just so I can see how I appear to the students. Most of the students who are joining remotely do not turn on their cameras, and I'm totally comfortable with that. They seldom turn on their microphones also. But if they do choose to put themselves on camera, I have it so that I can see myself and them both pretty well. Mention that they should stay muted unless they want to speak. It happens pretty rarely, I have found, but I do keep the chat feature open for students. And interestingly, I found that a lot of students like using the chat feature. And in fact, some students will participate a lot more in the chat than they would if they were physically in the classroom, just because of time constraints or a little nervous about speaking up in class, but being able to put things in the chat is great. I'll mention that a little bit more in one of the upcoming slides. So if you want to move us on to the next one, Christine. Thank you. So there are a number of benefits to doing this. So as I mentioned repeatedly now, students miss class. It happens. Life happens. And by live streaming class, students don't have to physically be in the room with me to be in class. They get credit for attendance if they are live streaming it. When things come up in their lives, whether it's car problems or their work schedule changes, or they need to take care of their child, or their own health, or their parents' health, or their partner's health is an issue. And there's a million things that come up. And this way, students can still be there in class, live or at a recording. It also happens too, sometimes students will have vacations with their family. I have a number of dual enrolled students and non-traditional students here at our college, and spring break for the high school doesn't always line up with the college. They might take spring break with their family, and you know, before doing this, they would just miss out on all that information. Now they don't have to miss anything, and I really, really love that about it. Increased participation. So as I was saying, a lot of students really like using the chat feature. I just have to remember to keep an eye on it. And with age, I need to be sure I have my glasses on so I can read what is there. But I think a lot of students love participating that way. So that's a great option. I'll mention also that it does help some students too who maybe have some social anxiety, just about coming to the class, or again, maybe they're worried about their own health and they'd rather stay at home, and that's totally fine. I love that students can watch the recording later so that if they can't be there at the moment that I'm talking, they can still pull that up later. And this is especially useful too if students need to review before a test. They can pull it up, they can watch it again, they can listen again, they can take notes on things that maybe I went through too quickly the first time. So it's really nice. Yeah, they don't have to miss a minute of my brilliant lecture. I do have some of those. And I like knowing that students, are not going to miss out on anything. It also allows a great opportunity for me to learn. So from time to time, I do go back and revisit the videos of my classes, and I can learn how to get better in terms of camera positioning and my volume and eye contact, and even how I explained a concept. I like it also too, just to know what I actually said to the students. There have been times where I know I told students to do this on their homework assignment, or that this was coming up in the future, and students have said, well, I didn't know we were going to have a quiz today, or you never mentioned that you were looking for this in the homework assignment. And I'm thinking, gee, I thought I said that, but maybe not. This allows me to go back and take a look, and I can offer an apology if I'm mistaken, and I can hold students responsible if I was accurate. I can also use these recordings in future classes, and this is really helpful. So if by some chance, I'm going to not be able to be in class on the day that I would cover conditioning terms, let's say, what I could do is pull up a recording from a past semester. I want to review it just to be sure that, we're at the same point in the semester and that I've explained things well and that there's nothing inaccurate there or things to change. But it's a really nice opportunity just to be able to kind of reuse that material that I largely would have said in class anyways. So there's a ton of benefits to doing this. And if you want to move us on to the next one. Okay. So that said, there are definitely some concerns about using this system, whether it's live or the recordings. And by the way, I did want to let you know again that there will be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions a little bit later. If you do have any questions or comments now, you can use the Q&A feature, And Christine hopefully will let me know if there is anything up there. So I teach psychology, and in our classes, we discuss a lot of very sensitive issues. We're talking about people being suicidal, having eating disorders. We're talking about sexuality and gender. In your classes, you may be addressing political issues that can definitely be very sensitive. There are times where I talk about tests and, upcoming tests or ones that students have already taken. And so you do have to be a little bit sensitive to that in terms of how you are approaching it. My hope is that you use sensitivity and that I use sensitivity typically when I'm addressing these things. But I think you have to be a little, I don't want to say cautious, but just a little bit more aware of, what you are saying and the fact that students are listening and potentially they could be listening with other people around. Potentially, they could look at those recordings later and show them to other people. Now, I am going to mention a policy that I provide for the students that I expect them to abide by, just kind of an ethical code with this system of live streaming and recording. But that said, I can't 100% guarantee that students, are going to abide by that. So I don't know about you folks. A lot of times where I am watching a live stream or a Zoom, I'm not always paying full attention. My hunch is that some of you are not paying full attention right now. You may be doing other things, and I get that. I'm guilty of that from time to time also. So, will students pay as much attention when they are live streaming or watching the video as they would in class? My hunch is no. But that said, students may not pay full attention in the class as well. We've all had students whose eyelids get heavy from time to time in our classes, or we see them looking at their phone, or we know that just mentally they are somewhere else at that moment. That happens. Again, for those students, they can watch the recording later to find out what happened when they were mentally checked out a little bit. Um, I know for me, there are times where I will listen to recordings on a faster speed. They may not catch every single word, but the thing is, it's their education, it's their choice, how they choose to attend class, how they choose to participate, how much attention they choose to pay. And there are times where it is beyond their control. Maybe they had to work second shift and third shift, and they roll into your class at 8 a.m., and it is hard for them to stay awake, um, whether they're watching the recording or in class. Those things can happen. Um, so I noticed more of this when I first started live streaming the classes, that because I made it an option that students could attend from a distance, students often chose to do that. As I mentioned before, that first semester, they had to. Some of them had to from time to time. Um, and I do have some students who join remotely way more often than they are there in the classroom. I would prefer they were in the classroom. I really would. I encourage it. You could even, incentivize it, in terms of getting some bonus points for being there in the room. That's your call. Um, but I have found that it is a little bit contagious, that when one or two students start joining more often remotely, I start seeing other students kind of doing the same thing. Again, it's their choice. I'm happy that they are there in whatever format. It does give them this option, though, of joining from a distance more often, and they may not pay as much attention. I do have to keep a better eye on the chat. I would say I do pretty well with that. And usually, once the first student puts something in the chat, that kind of reminds me to keep my eye on it a little bit more. And potentially, that could be distracting while you're trying to focus on the class in front of you and what's on the screen. And now you've got something else to do. You have to look at the camera and you have to keep an eye on the chat feature. It's a lot to kind of process. And in psychology, we talk about multitasking. Generally speaking, people are not really good at multitasking, and generally speaking, people think that they are pretty good at it. So that's up to you. If you wish, though, you could turn off the chat feature. You could encourage students who have questions just to unmute at the time that they have them. My experience has been that's a little bit more distracting. Um, if you're talking, normally you might look around the room, see a raised hand, call on the student. You could tell them, turn on your camera if you have a question, raise your hand, and then wait for me to call on you. That's definitely an option. I do have to keep readjusting the camera from time to time. Like I said, for the most part, I do point it at the video screen, but there are times where I write things on the board. And when I do that, I want to point the camera in that direction. There is an issue. Can students see and hear okay? And the good news is that the answer is yes, at least in my classes. Students have told me they can see and hear pretty well. And I've looked at the recordings also. I find that the view is pretty good and the sound quality is pretty good. There is one exception to that. The one exception is that I have found that it's a bit harder to hear the students in the classroom when they are speaking. So just be aware of that. Even though they might hear you very well and they can see what's on the screen, they might be not as well able to hear their classmates. Okay, big concern. What if I say something wrong, inappropriate, and now there is evidence? Yeah, I'll be honest with you, especially in a psychology class, it's a little bit scary. I don't think I say anything that's too offensive, but there are times where, I say things that are a little bit provocative or controversial. It's just the nature of the classes that we teach. And, now there's evidence of this. So again, I want to talk a little bit later about a little disclaimer or a student ethical code that I put up. Again, it doesn't guarantee that there won't be any issues, but knock on wood, so far there haven't been any. But this is something that always concerns me a little bit. Even if the students in the room find my joke to be humorous, there may be someone who's watching that doesn't find it to be funny. So I just have to keep myself in check as best I can. And again, I think for the most part, I'm saying things that are totally appropriate. They are accurate. They are in line with our course content. Um, but you do have potentially a bigger audience, and you do have evidence of what you've said. So if we go to the next slide, I may talk a bit about muting. I'm pretty sure that I have something up there about that.
Yeah, David, before we go to the next slide, I
Sure.
did have a question come in. Would you
Excellent.
like to answer that now or hold it until the end?
No, I'm very good with answering questions right now as we go along.
Great. So this person is asking, they said, I am teaching a HyFlex class right now where most of the students are online with only one or two students in the classroom.
Oh,
What
interesting.
recommendations do you have that accommodates that dynamic? Students can see me and the screen when I screen share as I have a moving camera.
Oh, okay. So you got the camera, it automatically does its thing. You don't have to use the laptop like I do. I have one question out of curiosity from the person who asked, how did it wind up getting set up that way? So if they want to respond to you and you can relay, I'd be really curious about that. But while I'm waiting for that, so for starters, I'll say I have not had that experience. In every single day that I have ever taught with this HyFlex model, more students have been physically in the room than joining us remotely. And you're saying the scales are definitely tipped in that direction of joining remotely. The biggest thing I would probably say is besides keeping an eye on the chat, I would probably encourage all the students to keep the camera on them if they're able to do so. Just so you can have a
So
better, you can, see their faces, you can see their expressions. And it feels more like you are actually meeting with more students rather than, oh, just the two people in front of you. Yeah,
Thank
you were
you,
starting to
David.
say.
So they did follow up and said we have two campuses. So I teach at one campus and the others tend to be at the other or online. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a transportation, it's a distance issue. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But yeah, that's a really interesting class. I'd be curious to hear from you also. Like, what have you done to try to make this work? But maybe we'll hear back from the participant who posed that. But yeah, what an interesting situation. You may have skipped over a slide, Christine, or maybe I just went too quickly over something. Maybe not. Okay. One thing I will mention, and maybe it was in the disclaimers, or maybe it's the next slide, or kind of forget what I posted here. Um, but I always do have the option of muting or turning off the camera at various times. Um, about the only time that I really do that is if students are taking a test because there's just a lot of dead air at that time, or if I'm talking about the test, I will definitely mute during that time because I don't want those students hearing anything that I might say that could be on the makeup exam. Um, so you do have to be a little bit aware of that. I do also let students know in the room that if there is a time where, they want to share something with the class and they're worried about, their voice, being televised, being recorded, they can always let me know. I can mute it during that time. I can say, hey, there was a student in the room who has this question or made this comment. And that way, at least their voice isn't on the recording. So here's a little disclaimer. It's something I've been putting together more recently. In honesty, I should have been putting this together a while ago, but I just never really thought of doing it until I've had more conversations with some of my colleagues at Delta just about live streaming and recording classes. So class recordings, this is what it looks like in my syllabus. Please be aware that this class may be live streamed and recorded. The reality is that pretty much every day is live streamed and recorded. This is so students may not miss any class. I know I'm reading at you, but I know it's also kind of tiny, and there may be some things I want to share about this. This is so students may not miss any class content and or to help students review for testing. Generally, the camera will only be on the instructor or the screen, could say that, while the audio may come from anyone who's in the room. If there's ever a time you wish for me to turn off and pause the recording, please let me know. That's where I say it. Um, Reminds me also that it is something I have to be sensitive to at the end of class. A lot of times students will come up to the front of the room at the end of class. They may have questions about a quiz, about their grades, about something personal going on in their life. I just have to be sure to say, oh, okay, I'm ending the recording now, or I'm going to mute this now. So put that on your radar too. The resulting recordings, nor any form of copies of the transcripts of the recordings. Wow, I need to clean up the language there. Resulting recordings, nor any form of copies of transcripts of the recordings may not be used for any other purpose than as a replacement for notes taken in class and solely for the students in our class. Again, this is something I put together recently. I could clean up the verbiage there. Students will not make copies of the recordings nor release any to social media to share, to upload, otherwise distribute the recordings. The reality is I want to be in charge of what is happening with these recordings. And by putting it out there, it is possible that students could share this with others. I don't want that happening. That's why I've been putting this together more recently. While viewing the class live stream or the recording, please be aware that this content is private. Other family members or friends should not be viewing this. Absolutely, especially in classes, again, where there is sensitive content, political science, psychology, and many of the things that you folks are teaching, you get into some emotionally charged and sensitive subjects. This should be only for the students in your class. Children should not be present. And if you have questions or concerns about any of this, please speak with me. I do want students to know that if they do have concerns, if they do have questions about it, I'm here for them. I'm willing to talk with them about it. But it is kind of a new world in that sense. The notion of making a recording and putting it out there is very different than live streaming your class because the reality is you don't know what's going to happen on any given day, right? Someone could come into the class, they could ask you a question that takes things in a very different direction. And because of that, I think you have to be a bit more cautious, perhaps, than you would be in a traditional class where it's not being recorded, and more sensitive than perhaps if you made the recording just one-on-one and shared it with students. Again, there's an element of unpredictability. And it kind of makes it kind of makes the classes fun, given that you don't know exactly what's going to occur, but it can be a little bit scary at times also. And I think that is possible. That may be my last slide, other than just contact information. If you want to move ahead, Christine. Yep. Um, So I was going to open this back up to questions or comments from anyone. For those of you that have done this before, if you have any advice for me, I would love to hear it. If you have questions about how to do this, I'd be happy to answer those. What Christine just shared in the chat is a recording of one of my classes from January. I was talking mainly about research that day. It's about a 2-hour recording. You're welcome to watch all or part of it and get a sense of how this all goes. And you'll see that I'm moving the camera at times to face the whiteboard, to face the screen, to face me. I'm in and out of camera. You can hear my voice. This is, I think, a fairly typical class and a fairly typical representation of what would happen in my classrooms. Um, so again, I'm Dr. Dave Baskind. I teach at Delta College. You can see my email address and my phone number. Uh, but I'd be
We
happy to entertain any questions, any comments from any of you who are joining us.
we do have a couple more questions that came in, David.
Perfect. Yeah, I just saw
So
something in the Q&A.
yeah, so Nancy is asking, are there any problems with sounds from videos on the screen coming through?
Uh, I haven't encountered any. Let me put it that way. There have been times too where I've shown some video clips that are on the screen. I've shown them to the class. And again, I'm just pointing my laptop at the screen and I can hear it. I know when I watch the recordings later and I've had students, I've put it up there and asked students, were you able to hear that okay? And they haven't had any concerns. Likewise, in terms of background noises, that I would say it's only as much of an issue as it is for the people in the classroom too, where maybe there's some, students getting out of class and they're noisy out in the hallways. So in terms of being able to hear anything that I put on the screen or to hear me, it's usually pretty good. Hearing their classmates, that's maybe the one weak link. And in those smart classrooms where they do have microphones, that's really the one thing that has made me think a little bit more about possibly taking advantage of the smart classrooms and the cameras that move with me. But
Great. And if you have time for a couple more that came in here,
definitely.
um, if somebody's asking, do you use any synchronous assignments or activities, any that you have adapted from face to HyFlex?
Yeah, I like that question. And I have done some in-class activities, and what I tell the students in the room is that, if you want to get together in small groups and work on it, you can. For the students at home, uh, they get to do that same activity, but they're working on it solo. So I really haven't set it up so that, the students joining remotely can work together or that they can work with students that are physically in the classroom. That definitely is an option, though, and an opportunity. You could set up breakout rooms so that students can get together that way. But for most of my assignments, I've told students you can work on it solo, or you can talk about this with your classmates. So for the students at home, they've mainly just worked on it solo. But it is something I could definitely be pursuing.
So we've got lots of great questions coming in here. Jen is asking, when students register for classes, are they made aware that this is a HyFlex class and that the class will be recorded?
No, is my answer. So the classes are listed as in person. And that's been my preference to list them that way. And then when I share the syllabus with them, which I usually do 2 to 3 weeks before the semester begins. So for my classes starting up in May, probably in the next few days, I'm going to share the syllabus and I send out a little email greeting and I let students know it then that class will be live streamed, it will be recorded, and I tell them, while you are welcome to join us remotely anytime for the classes, I really prefer that you come in person. So no, they typically don't know about it until I send that email a few weeks before the semester starts.
And it looks like we have one final question right now. This panelist is asking, if the camera follows you, how do students see what you're projecting?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I haven't taken advantage of the smart classroom where the camera follows you. And I think you can set it up so it stays static on the screen or it stays with you. But for me, I just think it's easier just to work with my laptop and I can just keep moving it to wherever I choose to move it. So as I've said, I usually keep it tilted so it's facing, if you pretend the projector screen is here, and then I usually stand about here so that they can clearly see what's on the screen, but they can also see me in the corner. There are times where I'm pacing around a bit and then I'm over here doing something and then I'm back in camera. But I usually keep it facing the screen for the most part. But the only exception I mentioned is that on occasion, if I am writing stuff on the whiteboard, I want the at-home students to see. I will shift it so that they can clearly see the whiteboard behind me.
So as a follow-up to that, they have written here, for hours, students can see screen sharing and the camera so they can see both. I presume the screen sharing is larger though.
Yeah, I think it is. Again, though, I haven't taken advantage of the smart rooms to see what it would look like in terms of how big is the screen? Am I on camera? Can we do both simultaneously? I would imagine that those are options, but I just haven't pursued it. I've taken a very low-tech way of doing something that's kind of high-tech. Just moving my laptop has so far it's been pretty successful and simple. I like simple. I'm not great with technology. It's definitely not my strong suit. So I've appreciated the ease at which it's been able to work in the virtual classroom with D2L.
Well, this is great. We had great participation and questions. Thank you all so much for your participation today. So it looks like
Yeah.
we are up, our time is up for the questions. I want to thank David again for attending today and sharing this wonderful advice. So we will be emailing you all a link to view the recording of the webinar once it's available. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for one of these Learning and Growing webinar series that we hold, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which I am linking in the chat now. So hopefully you can see that in there. So these free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning. We are an innovative educational courseware company. To learn more about our mastery-based course materials and Hawks and how Hawks can advance learning outcomes for you and your students, visit us at hawkslearning.com. I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day, and thank you again for attending today's webinar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Well, thanks for all your help, Christine.
Thank you again for doing this. This was wonderful, very interactive. I love that we had so many wonderful questions.
I agree. Any idea how many people attended today, just out of curiosity?
So it looks like we had 18.
Oh, terrific.
There's still a few participants that are
That are still
on
there.
right now. So yeah, just gonna give them a minute to if they were taking any notes or anything on your contact info and make sure that they're able to get that before they.
Yes, for anyone who's still on here, feel free, drop me an email anytime, or call if you wish, can go old school. But I'd be happy to be in touch with anyone. Anything I can do to help, or questions I can answer, or advice you can give me. Happy to learn how to get better.
It was very interactive, awesome. That's a
Yeah,
hot topic right now, clearly. Um, so we will be, like I said, sending that recording out. So I assume that you'll be getting a copy of that as well. And that did show up in the chat when I put in the link to your course, correct? To
yes,
your
I saw it.
great. Okay, it looks like there's a couple people kind of lingering, but I think I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. It looks like I think we've got enough uh, time for people to get your information.
I think so.
Okay, well, thank you again, David.
Thank you. Well, have a great day, Christine. And thanks
You,
for your help with the technology end of things.
no problem. That's what we're here for. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.